organizing it and SOAS for hosting it. This meeting seems to be very encouraging. I have never seen so many young faces before, which is actually very, very encouraging because the future belongs to the youth, as they say. And I hope we engage with an open mind. All of us mean well, even though the methods we employ to reach where we want to reach may be different, but the goal is exactly the same. I think bearing that in mind is very, very important. If we really want to have a useful and fruitful dialogue, we should be open, ask all uncomfortable questions. I will do my best to address every question you have, and I also expect to learn from you. It's a mutual. It is both-way traffic. It's not only. I'm not only here to give, but I am also here to learn. That kind of attitude is very important. Okay. As you can see, I am going to talk about the impact of the national service. Very briefly, you know how ambitious the national service is, and its effects are also so many. So I wouldn't pretend that I would exhaustively deal with its impacts. Many philosophers and political theorists have written a lot and extensively about the national service. And different philosophers also explain why national service is important. What are the most critical contributions national service can make theoretically? And the first one is what they call the moral equivalent of war. As all of you know, when a country is fighting, waging war against an external enemy, war, in spite of its destructive effects, has a tendency to unite people against a common enemy. And in the process, very powerful networks of solidarity, mutual respect, understanding are created. And the differences that exist within the community that is fighting against a common enemy are usually relegated to the background. And national service, some philosophers argue that it can function as it is a moral equivalent of war in peacetime. In peacetime, you can use national service in order to create the values that are normally created in wartime. That is one important contribution national service can make. And the second is, if you have a comprehensive or universal national service, it can enable the government to meet unmet social needs, like the social services in hospitals, in schools, in cleaning of cities, and so on and so forth. Because if a government has to employ people to do that, it may not have the resources. It's not only the contribution these activities make, but it is also the social change and transformation the servers, the conscripts in this case, undergo, that are considered very important. So national service is said to have a transformative effect, not only on the society where it is performed, but also while participating in national service, the conscripts or the servers are expected to undergo fundamental changes. And those changes are considered critical to a society's unity, to a society's progress, social and economic progress. It's also considered, from an equitability point of view, very critical, because national service, if it is compulsory and universal, involves every citizen irrespective of their nationality, sex, class, education, and so on. And that in itself is supposed to be a unifying exercise. That's why philosophers also emphasize the aspect of equality of national service. It's also considered as a critical instrument of national unity, social integration. Actually, one of the philosophers, Amitai Etzioni, refers to it as a sociological mixer. If you bring people from all corners of a country, from different religions, different ethnic backgrounds, they meet together, they work together, they interact with each other, and in the process, they are able to engender values that promote equality, social cohesion, and so on. And then national service also is said to build the characters. When the youth is idle, they may engage in drugs, in a consumption of alcohol. Maybe they will engage in other undesirable social activities. But in the national service toughens the youth, they say, physically and morally. And therefore, it is very important and good. And then it is also considered as a training for good citizenship, provided it is implemented within a democratic framework where free dialogue, free discussion is allowed, and in the process they can develop, the participants can develop their critical thinking. These are the main reasons why most philosophers, there are also many who are opposed to national service. They don't see the reason why young people, instead of pursuing their interests, going to schools, are forced to participate in national service. But the benefits are said to outweigh the negative effects on the service. The Eritrean National Service, the proclamation of the National Service was among the first proclamations that the independent Eritrea, actually it was the provisional government that enacted proclamation on national service. It was actually number 11 of the laws the independent government proclaimed or enacted. In 1991, they enacted proclamation number 11, 1991, on the national service, but it was never implemented. But if you look at the text of that proclamation, actually it was going to affect very few people, the unemployed, and the women who worked, men and women who worked in bars, or those who were involved in undesirable economic activities like prostitution and so on. All the others who were working, peasants, married women, they were exempted. So there were so many exceptions and many exemptions also. So had it been enforced, very few people would have been affected. But without, no, sorry, I think I have gone too far. Then that was replaced, it was repealed, and a new proclamation was enacted in 1995. And that proclamation actually eliminated every form of exception and exemption, except two categories. And these are the former combatants and those who are physically or mentally unfit. And they have to be, their unfitness has to be certified by medical doctors. And the militia that were served in the National Liberation Movement were also exempted. Everybody else between the age of 18 and 40 was required to participate in the national service. There were no exceptions, no exemptions. Even religious objection based on religion was not allowed. You remember the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Pentecostals, and so on. I think I have covered this. There were no other exemptions. And the duration of the national service, according to the new proclamation, was 18 months. The same was true with the old proclamation. 18 months, but 6 months military training, and 12 months participation in national reconstruction. Actually, to give the devil his due, before the border war, the government strictly enforced their proclamation. 4 rounds were demobilized before the border war. It was only after the border war and after the introduction of the Warsaw-Alo development campaign, the National Service became open-ended. So what are the objectives of the Eritrean National Service, as stated in the 1995 Proclamation? One is to establish a strong defense force in order to ensure free and sovereign Eritrea. The survival of Eritrea was believed to be a function of a strong defense and fighting capability. So the National Service was intended to create that, one of its objectives. It's also to preserve and transmit the values, the cherished values that actually determined the outcome of the revolution. We'll see what these values are. And thirdly is to create a new generation characterized by love of work, discipline, and in short, people who can contribute to national reconstruction, reconstruct the war-torn Eritrean economy. And I have left the fourth one, it's not relevant for this purpose. And the fifth one is to foster national unity among our people by eliminating subnational feelings like religious, ethnic, and so on. These are the main objectives of the National Service. And the purpose of my research is actually to evaluate the extent to which, after 19 years, this have been achieved. Ideally, the best method would have been to go to Eritrea, examine, scrutinize the situation on the ground, but because of the situation at home, all of us know that was not possible. And the only alternative I saw to do this was to interview as many deserters as possible, those who have first-hand experience of the National Service. So the findings I am going to present are based on their perceptions. As you know, hitherto nobody has attempted to evaluate the National Service.
Okay. I think it's bounced back one slide.
Oh, I'm not using it anymore for the time being. Yeah. So, and the purpose of my research actually is to see the extent to which the aims of the National Service have been achieved. And the only way I could do this was by interviewing people who have first-hand knowledge. And what do these people say then about the aims and objectives of the National Service? And in accordance with their evaluation, the extent to which they have been achieved. Let's have a look at building of Eritrea's defense and fighting capability. What do the participants of the National Service say? Since this is the first aim or objective of the National Service, I asked the interviewees about 215 in the UK, Sudan, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, South Africa, and Kenya. I asked them to state the extent to which, in their opinion, the National Service contributes to creation of a powerful defense capability. 67% said, yes, it does contribute to building of national defense force. The rest say it doesn't. And I asked them actually, the quantitative answer is not interesting, but the qualitative answer that follows from that is more interesting. And what one of the respondents said, without the National Service, Eritrea's defense capability would have been very weak. Another said, indeed, the National Service has built Eritrea's fighting capability. Had it not been for the National Service, Eritrea would have been recolonized by Ethiopia. But about 33% said the National Service actually does not contribute to the building of national defense capability. and I asked them to explain why. And some of the explanations they gave are, one of them, for example, said, the national service cannot build Eritrea's fighting capability. I am only giving you examples. I am only quoting a few, because the data I have got is massive. One of them said the national service cannot build Eritrea's fighting capability as long as it remains compulsory. Another said an army that is kept by force against will for 10 or more years cannot build the fighting capability of Eritrea. A university graduate who was among the interviewees said, the hearts and minds of the Agalglot means, for those of you who don't understand the Tigrinya, it means conscripts. The hearts and minds of the Agalglot are elsewhere, not in Eritrea. The large majority spend their time either conspiring on how to escape or daydreaming. Eritrea's defense capability cannot be built by relying on daydreamers. End of quote. And he continued, a capable military manpower and a robust fighting capability are the function of advanced military skills, high level of concentration, passion, perseverance, and powerful belief in the future. These critical traits are completely absent among the conscripts. In short, the national service has deteriorated so much that it has willy-nilly defeated its own goals by creating and reproducing conditions of despondency, lethargy, and obsession with life outside Eritrea. The Eritrea they once dreamt of may not be dead, but it's not yet in sight. A female conscript said, building Eritrea's military manpower requires moral fortitude and openness on the part of the Tegadelti. Tegadelti means the ex-combatants, the former combatants, and the Agalglot, the Warsai or the conscripts. These were destroyed by the commanders. The norm is, do as I tell you, otherwise you will either be detained or killed. And the second aim of the national service, as you saw earlier, is to transmit the values such as heroism, dedication, selflessness, to die for the interest of the nation developed and consolidated during the War of Independence. Eritrea's victory over Sub-Saharan Africa's largest army is by any measurement awesome. And it is these values which the National Service intends to transmit to the present and future generations. War, as I said earlier, in spite of its destructive effect, fought against a common enemy, has a tendency to produce a powerful sense of common purpose, feeling of solidarity and values that function as glue that holds society together. However, there is no guarantee that once the enemy is defeated, that these values will persist forever. And the leadership of the Eritrean government actually was very much aware of this. And they were concerned, especially the architect of the National Service, the president, was excessively preoccupied with what might happen once Ethiopia is removed from the picture. And the aim of the National Service was actually to inculcate the values of the revolution in the present and the future generations in order to secure the continuity of the society, of the country rather, of the government rather. But the question, this is quite fundamental, and it's quite legitimate that the government wants to perpetuate these values in the country, because without them, Eritrea would have stood no chance to come out victorious from the 30 Years' War. But when you think deeply about this, what are the factors that could make this possible, I identify 4 factors that are critical. One is, I'm talking about the extent to which the National Service would be able to transmit to the future and the present generations of values. And one is, this is firstly dependent on the extent to which the Warsai, the conscripts, perceive the Ikalo, the combatants, ex-combatants, not only as the repository and the embodiment of the values, character, traits, and norms of the revolution, but more importantly, as positive role models from whom they would want to learn through emulation. Secondly, on the extent to which the Warsai are willing and able to embrace or take the values, characters, and norms developed during the violent war of independence. This is crucial not only because the conditions of war which engenders these values and the attitudes and impelled the former EPLF fighters to accept their moral and patriotic duty to fight and die for had changed in the post-independence period, but also it cannot be taken for granted that the Warsai considers these values and norms as being prized, worth emulating, because they are the product of a different era. Thirdly, whether the Ikalo, the former combatants, would be able to transmit the values and the legacy of the revolution is dependent on the extent to which they have been able to preserve and hold these values in the post-independence situation, notwithstanding the multiplicity of the individual and familial demands and pressures that may substantially erode the values they internalized during the wartime. And fourthly, the ability or inability of the Ikalo or the former combatants to transmit the treasured and primary values of the revolution to the Warsai is also dependent on the nature of the relationship between the two. If the relationship between the Ikalo and the Warsai is marked by conflict and contempt rather than mutual respect, harmony, and cooperation, the latter may resent rather than emulate the values the Ikalo represent or hold. And the data clearly indicate that the relationship between the Warsai and the Ikalo is very, very unhappy one. I will quote some of the data from the interviews I conducted. So the respondents were asked to rank order their responses to the following generalization. The generalization stated, the National Service preserves and transmits to present and future generations the courage, resoluteness, dedication, and heroism shown during the 30 Years' War. 47% said the National Service functions as an effective mechanism of transmission. A slight majority, 53%, said think that the National Service does not preserve or transmit the values of the 30 Years' War. The data shows that the respondents do not speak with a single voice. Their opinions are divided, as expected. One key informant, for example, said, yes, the National Service was an indispensable instrument of connecting the second generation of nationals, the Warsai, to the first generation of fighters, the Ikalo. Before we went to Sawa, our knowledge and understanding of the significance of the 30 Years' War was superficial. At Sawa and after, not only did we gain greater insights and understandings of the liberation struggle, but we also embraced the primary values and norms that lay at the heart of its success. Another said, although the National Service and the Warsai Ikalo Development Campaign have helped us to undergo considerable transformation in our attitudes, values, and sense of patriotism, we were equally put off by the high level of heavy-handedness and the inequalities that characterized our relationship with the Ikalo. Another respondent pointed out the Ikalo were privileged. The quality of the food they ate was far better, and they could order us to cook their food, wash their clothes, clean their houses, and could even demand sexual service from our female cohorts. These practices engendered among us a general feeling of resentment, and consequently, the Ikalo failed to play a positive role model. Another said, for the National Service to be able to preserve and transmit to us and to the next generation the positive characteristics that were dominant during the 30 Years' War, the Ikalo, who are supposed to be our role models, ought to represent these values. Listen to this. Although there is no doubt that during the 30 Years' War, the Ikalo were heroes, judging from the way they behaved and interacted at Sawa and outside of Sawa, there was nothing that indicated that they were still in possession of the values and traits they had internalized during the War of Independence. In fact, the behavior of the commanders was so disgraceful that they discredited the legitimacy not only of the values of the revolution but also of the National Service. The tendency among some of us was to dissociate from the values and norms that regulated their behavior. Maybe I should skip this in order to get enough time for the discussion. According to the findings of the study, the National Service has not been an effective instrument of transmitting the values of the liberation struggle to the war side. And I attribute this, among other things, due to lack of political education. There is no political education in Sawa. There is only political socialization. And the two are fundamentally different. In political socialization, the aim is to transmit values in order to influence the behavior of those who are the subjects of the study. But in political education, it is a two-way traffic. There is continuous questioning. The focus is on development. The focus is on personal development, development of critical thinking. You're not trying to produce yes men, but people who question, who take nothing for granted. This can only happen in a democratic framework. Let's have a look at the third objective of the National Service. It is to create a new generation characterized by love of work, discipline, ready to participate and serve in the reconstruction of the nation. What do the Warsai say about this? One of the questions I asked them was, the generalization. The National Service has substantially contributed to reconstruction of the post-war Eritrean social, economic, physical, social infrastructure. And a few of their responses are the following. One of them said, you cannot most of them were negative on this issue. You cannot reconstruct a country with forced labor. This is exactly what is happening in Eritrea, said one of them. Another said, the prerequisites for national reconstruction are organization, forethought, and capital. Eritrea is devoid of all this. The government has held the youth hostage. A third said, any reconstruction work undertaken against the will of the Agalglot in which they are held as prisoners can't achieve its targeted goal. Another said, the indefinite service has sapped the morale of the youth. The national reconstruction is possible. National reconstruction is not possible by destroying the family. Development begins with the family. The National Service has destroyed the family, and it cannot contribute to national reconstruction. The last quotation I have is, all happens coercively, and I don't think reconstruction or construction can happen without the will of the participants. The fourth aim of the National Service is to foster national unity among our people by eliminating subnational feelings and to promote social cohesion. The findings of the study show that this has been the greatest achievement of the National Service. When asked whether the National Service fosters social cohesion, harmony, and national unity, the respondents were almost unanimous on this. Just to give you, I will quote a few. Yes, said one, I strongly believe that bringing together in one place of nationals from different regions, religious and cultural backgrounds promotes mutual love, understanding, unity, and cohesion. Every citizen should support this endeavor. Another said, the National Service I have come to know, In the national service, I have come to know lots of places I did not know before. I also learned a great deal about the various ethnic groups and their cultures. Another says the national service takes you to different places, and the common experience we gain in the national service enables us to learn about Eritrean societies, history, cultures, geography, and religions. Most of them are in agreement. Because you meet people from different ethnic groups, your views about them change. For example, before going to the national service, I never thought that the Kunama interacted with other groups. But my opinion changed, my belief and opinion changed completely. I'll skip many. Another said, the youth mixes easily to form a cohesive entity. At the time I was there was competition among the youth to excel each other in terms of getting along with others. Another said, there were two critical voices in this. I have included them. Initially, the trend was towards unifying the Eritrean society. However, when the whole program failed, the objectives of unifying the country and society also failed. Another said, it's another one actually. The Eritrean people have never fought against each other on the grounds of ethnicity and religion. This has always been the case. I reject the belief or the statement that the national service has created previous unknown sense of harmony and unity. This has always been the case in Eritrea. And the final quotation I have here is, live in your home Okay. Living your home enables you to gain exposure, and this in itself is a school which teaches you about places, languages, cultures, which I was unfamiliar with before. And this clearly shows that the national service actually works as a sociological mixer, as Izioni said. How about the other effects of the national service? Well, one of the negative effects of the national service is the depletion of the country's manpower resources due to largest you're here instead of in Eritrea. Indicates that this represents a major loss to Eritrea's future, to Eritrea's present interests and future. So, and we know what is happening to many of our sisters and brothers en route to safety. That is one of the negative effects. And then human trafficking, you know how many of our brothers and sisters, how many of us haven't received early morning calls because of our sisters, brothers, cousins are taken hostages in the Sinai or Eastern Sudan. You cannot be 100% sure in the absence of national service no Eritrean would have been trafficked. We don't know because the counterfactual is hard to prove. But in the absence of national service, I can say with almost full certainty that less number of our sisters and brothers would have been trafficked and would have escaped the suffering at the hands of these brutal traffickers and the middlemen. Collapse of our household livelihoods. All of us come from Eritrea, most of us here come from Eritrea, and do you know how our families make ends meet? The most important source of livelihood in Eritrea is diversified sources of income. A daughter works in the city as a domestic worker, or she works in the factories, she works as a teacher in the nursery, or she migrates to the Gulf states another looks after the livestock, another works in construction. There is no construction these days, unfortunately, because the construction sector is closed, except the sector that belongs to the party. The others migrate to the cities, and they make ends meet by pulling these meager resources together. The National Service has actually attacked the backbone of the livelihood systems, and many families' livelihood systems have been destroyed. And as you will see later, one of the reasons the respondents give why they left Eritrea is to support their families. I don't know how many of you have seen it. It's on the website, you can check it. The World Bank and the IMF conducted a major study, especially the World Bank, on the manufacturing sector in 2002. And their conclusion was that the manufacturing sector is on the verge of collapse because of shortage of labor. Because most of the productive members of Eritrean society were mobilized. They were in the trench instead of working in the factories. And one of the conclusions is that Eritrea's products, industrial products, as little as they were the most expensive almost in the world or regionally. And Eritrea's produce was the least competitive product in the regional and international markets because of the high cost of labor. Can you imagine Eritrea, which is supposed to pursue labor-intensive enterprise, its products being so expensive because of high labor costs? And that is because of the National Service. If you want to understand the negative impact of the National Service on household economies, just have a look at this, because pictures talk louder than words. One of the questions I asked the respondents was how many siblings, sisters and brothers they have in the National Service, they had or have in the National Service. And as you can see, I don't know those of you if you can read it, from 0 to 7. This is in percentage. And you can see very few had about 17% had no brothers and sisters in the National Service. Some had as many as 2, 3, 4, 5, even a few, very few had up to 7. And can you imagine the impact of this on the household's livelihoods? I asked the respondents, actually this was too long and I couldn't include everything, but just to have a look. I asked them what impact the National Service had on their particular families. And this is some of them say. Respondent 48, for example, number 48 said, our farms are left without protection and destroyed by elephants. Many families have suffered as a result. When my brothers and my husband left our family to join the National Service, my mother-in-law and I were left alone, and we could not look after the livestock. And the livestock, probably you can imagine what happened to them. My parents suffered from depression, poverty, because we all went to the National Service. Probably this was one of the guys who had probably 4 or 5 siblings in the National Service. I used to support my parents. When I went to the National Service, they had no one to look after them. Now they depend on handouts. My parents lost 3 of their sons to the National Service and were left with no one to help them. You can read this, there are so many. I have actually an article, I can give you the link if you want, on this, where these are listed in an article, which was published in the Journal of East African Studies recently.
About 5 minutes?
Yeah, I will be able to. Okay. I asked the respondents why they left Eritrea. Why did you leave Eritrea? You can see the large majority, over 51, 52% said It's too long. So the open-ended nature of the national service has become the major driver of forced migration. Too long. Very few, about 12% or 13%, said they are opposed to the whole notion of national service. It's a clear minority. Actually, when I asked the respondents whether the national service should be stopped, 86% said no. It should be limited to 18 months. 18 months, they said. And some of them said it has to be voluntary. But the large majority do not want it to stop. They are not, in principle, opposed to the national service. They are opposed to the way the commanders treat them. They are opposed to the whole idea of rendering it open-ended, never-ending obligation. And they hate also the abuses that the commanders perpetrate against them. Otherwise, had it been enforced within the parameters of the proclamation, the majority would have been in favor of it. So, about 18% also said, I left the national service to help my family. It follows from the previous data. Quarreled with my commander, quite substantial actually, about 65%, escaped from prison. So you can see that the open-ended national service has become actually the single most important driver of forced migration in Eritrea. We'll talk about it. Some of you may argue, but it is forced upon Eritrea. Eritrea has no choice but to make the national service an open-ended one. And we're going to discuss that because it's very interesting. It concerns all of us. And we will consider the argument around it. Okay. Okay. You remember, all of you, those of you who have served in the national service or even others, the proclamation clearly states that the national service is for 18 months. 6 months military training and 12 months participation in national reconstruction. But have a look. How many years have the respondents served? But these are respondents who ran away, who left the national service. If you were to interview the people who are still there, the data would be completely different. Some of them have been in the national service for 17 years, 18 years, 20 years, soon 20 years actually. Not 20 yet. Yeah, exactly 20 years actually. Next May, 20 years. And have a look at the data. Some of them have been in the national service for 7, 6. They were supposed to be there only for 18 months. And look at the distribution. These are probably ex-combatants, because when I conducted the survey in 2012, the national service has not been in existence for 20 years. But these are insignificant. But if you look at this, some have been there for 17 years, 16 years, and the cohorts of this guy, if they are still there, they have been in the national service for more years. And the question that arises is, how long are they going to be there? The government has not stated when it intends to demobilize these people. And if they are not demobilized, do you blame them for running away? Wouldn't you run away if you were in their position? I would. Okay. One of the questions I asked, tried to find out, was whether or not the national service inculcates some virtues and vices on the conscripts. And this is what they said. The majority say we have learned, we have become more hardworking. But then the question is, what choice did they have? Regardless of why they have become hardworking, that's positive. That will become a habit. And assuming they stayed at home, they would be able to contribute to the country's development and progress. Cooperation, you can ask, if you really want to scrutinize this, are these voluntarily acquired, or they were the result of the rigorous discipline that governed the national service? We can discuss that if you want. But what struck me was They also say they learned vices. I was really surprised. They said they have learned to become fraudulent, deception, dishonesty, opportunism, docility, and laziness. Laziness is insignificant, but I was really surprised. And then when in the extended discussion, when I probed them, they say, to survive, you do anything. You also emulate the behavior of the commanders, who are very corrupt, vile, cruel. What choice do you have except to do what they tell you to do? And sometimes they use the conscripts against each other. And some of them, I was in South Africa not a long time ago, a few actually came and told me, I really feel guilty for the role I played during the national service. To please my commanders, the commanders, I have caused harm to my friends. Some of them even say I was pimping, trying to get girls to my commanders. It's not all commanders, but many commanders were really corrupt, they say. The Warsai the people I interviewed actually have very little positive to say about their commanders. And these are supposed to operate as a conveyor belt to transmit the values of the revolution. But you can see there are positive things. I think, okay. Other negative effects, widespread sexual abuse of power. This is very controversial, but the interviewees, actually, most of them say there is widespread abuse of power. None of the people I interviewed, except few, have ever witnessed women being abused. But why do they have to witness it? If they witness it, then it will never take place. But they give you indirect evidence to show that there is a lot of sexual abuse of power. Unwanted pregnancies to avoid national service. I am sure many of us in this hall have sisters or cousins, nieces, who got pregnant to avoid going south, or got married to people whom they didn't love in order to avoid going to national service. Early marriages is very single motherhood. How many of us are not supporting our nieces and nephews who have become a burden to their parents? Because the female conscripts get pregnant and return home with their kids. The parents suffer actually doubly by losing their breadwinners and also their daughters coming back home with dependents. Unsafe abortions. Suicides are also they are not unheard of. I am sure many of us have heard of boys and girls, especially girls, who commit suicide. You know, getting pregnant without being married in Eritrea is stigmatized. A woman who gets pregnant without being married is highly stigmatized. And birth control maybe is not freely available to all. And how many of the young girls know about birth control anyway? And if they know, how can they access it? So there are lots of problems which the government knows very well it exists, but does not admit it openly and does not do anything about it. The government assumes that the national service is almost a carbon copy of the national liberation struggle, and therefore these abuses do not take place. But all of us know this is a wishful thinking. I think I will stop here. Thank you very much.